and I really thought their voices sounded really great together, so I thought they could benefit from a great recording. So I contacted them, and we got to work. Now for the pre-production, I studied the original mix of the song Little Talks. I just wanted to get an idea of what the original engineer had in mind for the guitars, where to place them, and what he was doing with the vocals mainly, since it was a duo as well. I reviewed their artist account on YouTube to get more sense of what they really sound like. And lastly, I set up their seating arrangement inside of my project studio, and that was a very important thing to consider later on in the slides. We'll see. Now for the recording, we did a live recording of this song with the use of a metronome, and it was basically fed to their headphones, and they would play to the click. The guitars were interesting. We used a space pair technique on the guitars. One microphone was aimed towards the bridge of the guitar to get more of the body and warmth from the qualities of the guitar, and another one towards the 12th fret of the guitar to get more of the clarity and that bright sounding of the guitar. So putting them both together, we get a really good balance between bright and booming at the same time. So yeah, and then lastly, I positioned them across from each other for rejection. Here's a little illustration. To your left, we have Hope. To the right, we have Jackson. Now they're pointing directly across from each other, and they're both in the corners of the room. And by doing this, right behind the microphone is what we call the knoll of the microphone. And this rejects anything behind the microphone, basically. And everything in front of the microphone, and a cardioid position mics, which are most microphones on the market, picks up everything in front of it. For the mixing phase, very simple. We just brought out some EQ, and it was a mistake on my part because I put them in the corners of the room. And by doing that, you get really weird frequencies to pop into the microphone by reflections. And by eliminating that, we can control more of that boxiness that we get out of that room. And lastly, we compressed it a bit to bring out more details in the vocals and the guitar as well. Now let's take a listen to their cover of Little Talks.
Now we're torn apart, there's nothing we can do. Just let me go, we'll meet again soon. Now wait for me, please hang around. I'll see you when I fall asleep. Don't listen to a word I say. The screams all sound the same. 'Cause though the truth may vary, this ship will carry our bodies safe to shore. 'Cause though the truth may vary, this ship will carry our bodies safe to shore.
That's Jackson Hope. The next band we have is the Nars. They're a punk surf garage band. And I know the drummer from this band, but I didn't know at the time that he was in a band. I came across a post on that he was tagged in on Facebook, and it was a live recording of one of their performances, and I thought they were amazing. They had a really great tone going for them. So I shot them a message. They wanted to work together, and they were more than happy to work with me. Now for the pre-production, they didn't have much demos on the internet, so either through SoundCloud or YouTube. I searched as hard as I can. So the only way to really get a feel of their sound, other than watching the live video, is to go to the rehearsals. So I sat in the rehearsals, got a good feel of what they sound like, and at the same time, in my head, trying to figure out what kind of microphone configurations I can use to better suit the sound of their style. And we tracked the band at a rehearsal space. Now for the recording process, we created a reference track first, and then we overdubbed each individual instrument. By creating a reference track, what we do first is we record the band live with all the microphones on. But by doing that, there's not much control you can have in the end, since there's going to be a lot of bleed coming through the microphones. So creating that reference track first, and then using that track for subsequent artists to record on top of it, we have more control and more isolation in the end to work with. With the drums, we use Glenn Johns overheads. This is a really it gives a really wide stereo feel to it, and I thought this band can benefit from this style of recording. And lastly, the gang vocals. There's some gang vocals in there that's double tracked, and you'll hear in the recording that it really pops in your face. It jumps out of the speakers. It's pretty great. So really, it's just there to add more dimension to the recording and interest. And next, for the mixing, very simple. Just really heavy compression on the vocals for it to sit on top of all the instruments. They're very loud instruments for that band. So compressing a lot will make it sit nicely on top of all the other instruments. Also, we used EQ to slightly boost the frequencies to add a bit of edginess, but not too harsh to the ear for both the guitars and the vocals. Let's take a listen to what their reference track sounds like before we listen to their final version of the mix. And let's listen finally to their finished version of Porn Star Cousin by the Nars.
Much better.
1, 2, 3, 4!
And that's the Nars. Next in line, we have a jazz band. They call themselves Blue Like Jazz. I found out about them through the use of Craigslist. They contacted me on an ad that was looking for jazz musicians to record. And and then we just started to work together from there. Now for the pre-production, I was really intimidated by this particular session because I never worked with jazz musicians before. So this would be the really great opportunity to work with them and add them to my portfolio of work. So I studied extensively on microphone techniques, particularly for the jazz world. And I reviewed their performance videos through YouTube to get a sense of what they sound like and decide what microphones to choose for their session based on their instruments. And recorded at their drummer's rehearsal space, which is a really small place, and presented its problems that we'll talk about later in the slides. Now for the recording setup, the drum mic setup is really simple. Rather than using a 9 microphone setup, as we did for Caesar's band, Bad Phantom, there was only 3 mics used for the drums. And by doing this, it gives a really natural sound to the drums. It was only 2 overheads and 1 kick mic there. And with jazz, you want to treat the drums as one instrument rather than a snare drum, toms, and a kick. So keeping it as one instrument really makes for a more natural recording for the drums and suitable for the jazz session. The singer was faced towards the band, again, to reject everything behind the singer. And the bass mic was positioned towards the bridge of the bass. And by doing this, you get a good balance between the rhythm and the clarity from the string slap. And lastly, this is all recorded in a small room. Now for the mixing phase, there was very little compression done on the drums. And this is to keep it sounding natural. And a good amount of compression on the vocals. It was a little peaky. It would get a little loud at sometimes, a little too soft at times. So compressing it down made it really good, consistent level. And the use of filters was very important for this particular setup. This being a live recording, there's very little control I can do. So getting everything sounding as best as I can in the recording process was very important because it produces a lot of bleed. And for those of you who don't know what bleeding is in microphones, it's basically when a sound source goes into a microphone that wasn't intended to be in that particular microphone. So for instance, a vocal microphone, or vocal take, there was a female vocalist that was involved in this project, and she doesn't have much low-end frequencies. So by filtering out those low-end frequencies, we can take out a lot of those low-end instruments like the bass and the guitars and some of the drums as well. In the next slide, I'm actually going to show you what was going on in each of those instruments. So you're going to hear the vocal, the guitars, the bass, drums, soloed out, so you can get a feeling of what's going on, and then put together into one.
I waited till I saw the sun. When I saw the break of day, wish that I could fly away instead of kneeling in the sand.
I like to hear in that track, the guitars basically didn't have any bleed coming through at all. And this is due to the fact that it was recorded with a dynamic microphone, which is something like this, and it wasn't really sensitive, unlike all the other microphones involved as well. And it was close mic'd to give a good amount of isolation as well. Now let's listen to a track that we recorded, one of the 10 tracks actually that we recorded, Temptation.
Rusted brandy in a diamond glass. Everything is made from dreams. Time is made from honey, slow and sweet. Only the fools know what it means. Temptation, temptation, temptation. I can't resist. Don't pick anytime.
That's Temptation. Next on the list, we have a hard blues rock band called Whiskey and the Wolves. They contacted me as well through the use of Craigslist. And actually, this was the very first band to contact me a year ago, and also the very last band for us to get to work together as well a year later. Now for the pre-production, I listened to their demos. But the thing is, it really didn't quite give off the same feeling, or it didn't really make sense to listen to the demos, basically because it was just a guitar and their vocals on top of there. So I couldn't really get a good sense of what they really sound like as a full band. So I just had to go with my gut and just record them. The Pro Tool session was made before the actual recording date, and the reason for this is because it was very it was probably the biggest session I've ever worked with so far in my career, and yeah, it turned out great because it cut a lot of time out of setting up the session as well. And lastly, we picked the location, which was again a rehearsal space. Now for the recording process, we spent 4 hours, or I didn't spend 4 hours. The guitarists and bassists spent a total of 4 hours of the 8 hours we had to craft their tone heavily with a bunch of pedals and the use of their amps. And what they don't realize is most of the tone that they're crafting is going to be cut out in the mixing process. And the reason for this is because you want the certain elements of their tone, so their two guitars or their keyboard, to really fit in the mix in the end. So I didn't want to tell them that I'm going to cut out your tone. I just said, all right, go ahead and craft your tone, but in the end, it's going to be more work for me in the mixing stage to cut all that stuff out. Now, again, we created a reference track as well and overdub each instrument on top of it for a good sense of isolation in each recording. And nothing special with the drum mic. It's a typical rock drum setup. As for the keyboard, it was really interesting. My first initial reaction was to plug his keyboard into my mixer or my interface. And by doing this, you get a more cleaner sound out of it, not much acoustic problems going on with the room and the amp. But by doing this, it kind of